Coming up on the Inspired podcast.
Probably the worst father-son relationship you could have. My memory of it is like a poster of a man like in Midnight Express. You know, he didn't deal with things in a way that I would have liked, because I don't need to prove to my father or to myself to be a better person.
Welcome to the Inspired podcast by Gentech.
My name is Nick Jones, and what I love about making these podcasts is that I get to speak to people that really inspire me, with stories of how against all odds they have overcome adversity and really met the challenges thrown at them head on. Today I'm speaking to Adrian Simon. Adrian is an author, but he's also known for being the son of convicted drug trafficker Warren Fellows. Warren's story was made famous in the book called The Damage Done. Many of you will have read The Damage Done. It's a book that details the 12 years of hell in a Bangkok prison that Warren went through. I actually read this book in Thailand, where it was set whilst I was recovering after the '99 Mr. Universe competition. It was recommended to me by my friend Dennis James. Dennis is a former Mr. Universe and a successful professional bodybuilder. I found the book shocking and incredibly moving. I also just read Adrian's book, Milk Blood, which tells his side of the story. Growing up in suburban Australia, the son of two unconventional parents. One being an infamous convicted drug trafficker, the other an unconventional yet resilient mother. In reading Milk Blood, I felt I had a lot in common with Adrian. We're both children of single-parent families from a time when it was not common. We both lived in the same places around Australia and the UK. I feel very grateful to speak to Adrian today, as his father, Warren, has only just recently passed away. Adrian, welcome to Inspired. To kick things off, do you remember visiting your father in Bangkok prison when you were just 2.5 years of age?
I can't remember being inside the prison. I do talk about being in the prison. I patched that together with research and talking to my mum and painting a storyline that sort of depicts just how graphic and, you know, immensely traumatic a young child visiting, you know, a father who was to be executed with a mother in a very dangerous and wild environment. You know, there aren't too many worse places really. But I did visit him a couple of times inside those awful places.
And you do vaguely remember it?
Yeah, a couple of things in Bangkok and Thailand. It's very colourful. So for me, as a child, the visuals come to mind of bustling streets and the tuk-tuks and the loud noises and the fragrances and the things that do bring memory. Like, it's amazing, when I first started writing this, I sat down, I mapped it out, I saw my whole life and the stories that could put that all together. And then I thought, oh God, like, where's it coming from? Like, where's this going to come from? And so seeing and feeling Bangkok at the start really like opened up my mind into, you know, what those memories were. And it just released me being able to write for nearly a year. But I was engaged in the process of putting this book together and I had to do it. And so I just had never written anything substantial before. I was not bad. I could tell a story, and I'd learnt from travelling around and, you know, dealing with my father's book when I was trying to, you know, sort of propose some TV film stuff. So I got an understanding of storytelling.
Yes.
Yeah, and then just one thing led to another. But him in the prison, you know, now I can see it very vividly in my mind because I wrote about it, and it's quite powerful, that depiction.
Did your mum, Jan, help you visualise how it was as well? Did you speak to her about it?
Oh, yeah, she told me, she gave me a great insight into not only what she was dealing with externally, like she was a targeted woman, you know, because, you know, he was international news.
Yes.
This man had done a very bad thing in the eyes of the Australian public and the international press.
Yes.
They were making a big deal out of it. This is the first big international Westerner that was done offshore, and they were going to ram it home. So, yeah, it wasn't easy for her to even get into the prison. It took us 8 hours, I think, to even be allowed into the front gate. So we're waiting outside the front gate, and it was, you know, Thailand's hot, humid.
Yes.
I'm a young child. I was 2.5, you know, a bit older actually. But, yeah, it was difficult. But, yeah, to answer your question, Mum told me essentially, you know, what was going down in and around that.
Yes.
And then I could, you know, everything goes into your own mind, and you visualize it yourself. And so, whether it's entirely 100% what it was, time goes past, the brain sort of creates what it was, but the story was true.
That got me straight away in your book, because I'd read Warren's book, The Damage Done, your father's book, and not once, like I said, do you think about, did this guy have a wife? Did he have children? Did he have a son? Did he have parents? How did it affect them? In-laws, how did it affect them? So you don't think about it until that. So it was so engaging, the start of your book, it got me, from the scene that you set in Bangkok. And again, because I've been there a number of times, so I can understand the smells and the humidity and the hustle and bustle. And jumping ahead, when you were just 9 years old, so I know I'm triggering your memory, and I hope it's not too traumatic, but there was so much in milk blood that resonated with me. But you were just 9 years old. So again, I think of when I was 9. You were watching a current affair type of show with your mum and your grandfather, Colin.
Yeah.
And a man came on the screen. He was being interviewed. You didn't know, but the energy in the room changed. Obviously, your grandfather wasn't a fan of your father. Your mum in the morning explained to you that was your father last night. Up until that time, what had you told people about your father, and what did you think, and who did you think your father was, and where was he? Because you didn't know at that time that was your father, and he was in prison, in a Thai prison for smuggling heroin, did you? What did you know up until that time, or think?
Interesting question, because part of me always knew something really bad happened. And
Right.
as I just said in the last question, I did go to Thailand. There was leftover memories of some extreme experiences. But I think when you're a kid, you mold, your brain's just absorbing new information, you develop new senses and cognitively growing. So I think a few years after that happened, and I started becoming more aware of myself as 4, 5, 6-year-old. Obviously, life was challenging around me, but I was still, my mum protected me, my grandparents protected me so well that I was at school and, I was living like a kid's life. But there was always tension, and there was always media, and there was police and different things. So
Always, for that many years after?
years and years.
Really?
Yeah, in different ways.
Right.
I always knew that life was strange, and, I wasn't an easy kid.
Well, you weren't like the other kids at school. Didn't have the mum and dad, and they didn't have police and media hanging around. And
When I did see him on the news, it wasn't surprising. Like, there was a link in my brain that figured that this was the moment that I understood that this guy in front of me, not in my brain, was going, this is my father, but I kind of knew, if that makes any sense.
yes.
And the room, I remember it perfectly. My grandfather sitting there, and he took control on the Sunday. He was a very strict, straight English gentleman and very smart, but he was always watching his news, and that's what we did together. And it came on and was straight away. It wasn't like an intro storyline. We're going to the prison and having a look. My father was there, blurred out face, hands gripping bars, and they sort of, I don't know, he couldn't distort his voice, but he was, I could just tell the intensity of this man, and it was just grubby. Like, my memory of it is like a poster of a man like in Midnight Express sort of thing. And so one part of the room just went deadly tornado silent. I know that's a contradiction.
Yeah.
But there was like fury and silence. And then on my mother's side, I could just feel it going, holy shit, this is never going to end.
Yeah.
Never going to end. But little did I know the tension between my mother and my grandfather. They both walked out, like after it finished. And, I'm sitting there just realising, this is it. It was coming to a head. And it never got away from me, because I was told years later, and I'm so headstrong, and I realised that I determined myself, and I never let the outside influences direct. Later in life, in my late 30s, saw a psychologist who defined why I did this. When I was a child, like up 3 to 9, I fictionalised my father to people because he was absent.
Yes.
He wasn't around, and he was very far away. And different times, like, back then, the family stuck together. Parents stayed together, even if they hated each other. I was the only single child, so I'd go off to families, dinners, parties, things like kids do. But the questions were always asked, where's your father? Who's your father? What's your father do? Blah, blah, blah. I'd tell them amazing things like, oh, well, he's a New York stock exchange banker to he's a ski instructor in Switzerland because my mum smoked St. Moritz cigarettes.
Yeah,
I could see the Alpine. I was like, well, he's going to be over there.
Yeah,
he's killing it. And then the other one, he was like in the Air Force. But he was this very go-getting alpha male kind of figure that was heroic and protective and doing all these things that a child sort of looks up to in a male figure. And this is what I'm getting at years later when I saw this psychologist. He just said, well, that's quite common for children that have had traumatic experiences and an absent parent. They fictionalise to protect themselves. So what happened is, you create an illusion to protect yourself from the reality. But my story always changed. So no one ever got it.
Did you tell different stories to the same person?
Been trained well.
Yeah, far out. But you're protected as well. So, you're, like you're saying, your grandfather Colin and your mum Jan protected you from it. And
well, I changed my identity.
Yeah, was your surname Fellows when you were born on your birth certificate?
Yep.
It was. Yeah. So when did you change your name? Well, your mum changed it, I'm assuming.
When I was 7.
Gotcha.
So, I think because we moved around a bit. So I think it was when we were starting to really settle. We moved back into my grandfather's place in Sydney, and that's when Mum and him wanted me to have a stable schooling experience. So that's when, now we're going to be here, stay in the one suburb hopefully, and we'll change his identity, because not only can kids be cruel, but parents and teachers, I found out, certainly like to dig. Yeah, so I became a bit invisible, and what a task that, when I look back and go, how is that even possible, given the nature of what happened? My mum did an extraordinary job of protecting me from that.
Yeah, I got that from your book, actually, like the strength and hardworking nature of your mum, the determination by your grandfather to give you a stable upbringing, and for him to be that role model for you. He knew, he could tell, and although their relationship wasn't great, your grandfather and his daughter and your mum, they both played these roles. They dedicated themselves to you. That's how it came across in the book. Is that true?
Yeah, well, if I break down their personality, they're completely the opposite. But one thing that binds them together is I don't think, my mum has the most resilience that I've ever known of a person.
Wow.
But my grandfather always trained in me, because he went to the Second World War. He was a veteran. He saw battles, he lost friends. Grew up in a time where his parents were old, and he grew up in an abandoned train sort of thing. So they had a different life.
Wow.
But he always said, you judge by your character of your internal fortitude and your strength to, as I said before, manage your own affairs and keep a straight line for yourself.
What age did you pick up on that teaching?
Very young. But I had to. There was no time to waste, really. I couldn't be a loose kid.
Yeah.
That was going to sit around and fall apart over that. Even though I fell apart many different times, but I pulled it together. But for the majority of it, that education, and plus I am that sort of way. I like to think, in this day and age it's a bit different, but I always saw a masculine figure as being that way. Quite strong-minded, never impart your problems onto others. Just keep it together.
Yep.
Be a gentleman, have manners, and just live your life. Do the right thing and get on with it. And that was my take on all that.
And that's, I think, when you were saying that, don't put your problems on others and don't talk, that's a very English thing as well. Keep a stiff upper lip.
Yeah.
That's what they'll say, keep a stiff upper lip. My family, English and Welsh. So I certainly get that, and they don't talk much. They don't open up about the past and their struggles and what they went through. But, in this day and age, Adrian, I find it so important, and that's why we're doing the Inspired podcast, is because people do need to hear our struggles so they can associate with our struggles. And but it's that fine balance, isn't it, between being very vulnerable and talking about your emotions and your feelings, but and that self-love and that self-nourishment that we need to love ourselves. But then there's that hardness that we also need, where you just got to keep plowing through. You just got to get up, lace up your shoes and get out there and do your best, no matter what or how you're feeling. It's a real fine balance, isn't it?
And I think we have different balances at different stages of our lives with, again, different challenges. So, I completely agree. I mean, for me, writing a book, I was speaking to this person the other day who read these books and just goes, wow, you just really opened and put it out there, but, like a cool way. And, I thought, well, that's it. It's much easier, for me to dump a whole lot of emotions and experiences on paper rather than necessarily, get a bunch of my friends around and let them digest in my problems, really. So I can be separate from it because it's subjective to other people. But I was always mindful that I wanted to maintain that discipline within myself that, at the end of it, you've got to look after yourself. No one, as you say, is going to do your laces up for you.
Yeah.
And if people keep doing your laces up for you, you end up having no experience in life and you're just the pushover.
Exactly.
And I have no sort of respect for that, for myself. And the older I get, the more I realise just how, this sounds pessimistic, but just how alone and meaningless our own desperation and depressions can be in bad times, because we waste a lot of time in that mess that we can create for ourselves without having the tools. And I don't want to get wishy-washy, but to be able to draw ourselves back in, to keep that straight line, to know that things will work out. Like, life gets really bad. It does. It gets really, hellish. Yeah. And I've seen and witnessed it, especially both what my parents went through, even my grandfather in the war. We have very good these days.
Yes.
We're very safe and cushioned environments to grow and learn from. But, yeah, it gets me going. It's one of those things, I think, we've got to be able to pull it together ourselves. It's essential, because as an adult, no one's going to do it for you. I'm not a fan of people that are always looking for sympathy or...
You don't play the victim. I can see that.
This victimised society nowadays is really overly promoted, and I think it weakens person's resilience and understanding, because we now see it's easy to call someone, and I hate these terms, it's so easy to use it, but he gaslighted me, or she gaslighted me, or they did this at work and I didn't like it, and blah, blah, blah. And you think, okay, there are people out there. Like, I grew up, unfortunately, my father was A-class narcissist and the top order of it, right? And I've been gaslit in a massive stage by him my whole life. Massively. He's still my biological father and I love him, but, there's that side of me that just despises him for that. But I think now society is allowing people to use really their own insecurities to protect themselves against growing or owning up to things or doing the right thing.
Build a lean athletic physique using Gentech Nutrition's premium quality sports supplements. Use code INSPIRED10 and save 10% off your favourite products at gentech.com.au. That's GEN-TEC.com.au.
Welcome back to Inspired and our chat with author Adrian Simon. I asked Adrian what were other coping mechanisms he used while growing up.
Well, for me, I was a very energetic child, and sport was my driving motivation to ignore certain aspects of what was going on around me.
Yes.
So sport, and it's not for everyone, obviously, but it gave me a physical outlet that made me exhausted, for one. So exercise, for me, has always been a way to calm my mind, or if I've got a bit of pain in the brain, I like to say, it soothes it. When I was 9, back to what you're saying before, when I found my father on television, I had a nervous breakdown. When I was creating illusions about where my father was, when I saw him on television, and my mother the next day told me, son, this is your father, he did a bad thing, and he's in a bad place, and he's not coming back, and this is just the way it is. My mind collapsed because I had an illusion turn into a sudden disillusion.
Yes.
And so as a kid, the cognitive understanding sort of imploded, and I became obsessed on thoughts, and those thoughts became so erratic. So OTD is not widely known. It's linked to OCD or anxiety disorders. So when you see people with OCD, they keep vacuuming and they cleaning and they keep things straight and tidy. That's what I needed in my brain. So I would think something, and usually it would be quite violent. And I couldn't get it out of my mind. It was just constant, and it was threatening, and it was present, and it was scary. And at that age, you'd think, I just didn't know what to do. And went through a series of tests. No one could help me. The doctors said, well, look, they thought my life could have been over. The way that was going. Whether it be, not for me dying all of a sudden, but, 14 years old with a father in a Thai prison, I could have ended up being one of those kids on the street pretty easily. Fortunately, my mum was never going to allow that, nor my grandfather. But towards the end of it, I was introduced to cognitive behavioural therapy, which was from a child psychologist that gave me meditational practices.
Wow.
So,
and this is at 14?
No, this is at 9.
This is at 9
Well,
still,
it was a bit after. It was about a year and a half.
Gotcha.
Maybe 10 and a half.
So did you try a few different therapists and come up with this one?
There weren't many, yeah. I mean, I can't remember all of them. I think a lot of them just didn't know what to do. There was, nowadays, they just medicate kids, right? They just drug them up and try to soothe their mind with pharmaceuticals. But for me, I remember it was looking at, because I had really violent thoughts and I didn't want to act on them. My mum had to take, knives and forks out of the drawers and stuff because I could just strike. And my target was her, basically, because she was the one that told me my father was in the Thai prison, so I had the disillusion. On top of those illusions, it gets very psychological and, when you break it down. But with this lady who taught me about the meditation, it's crazy because the answer is it's not a problem in the mind. You're allowed to think what you ever want. As soon as you start thinking it's a problem, it's when it becomes a problem.
Right.
So that's the easiest way I can sort of deal with it.
Wow.
And as an adult and as a person who experienced that, I think to myself, well, I entertain anything I want in my mind now. It's inside my own skull. No one needs to know anything. Right? It happens. Good and bad.
Yes.
Right? That's reality. That's my reality anyway.
Absolutely.
But I know
you can change it. As an adult, you can change your thought. Thoughts can be changed.
Completely.
But back then you couldn't change these thoughts.
No. Yeah, so I had to confront it. So it's a contradiction of looking at the violence, the imagery. So this lady was in a nice peaceful room. There'd be a beautiful painting on the wall. It was, I think it was a mountain setting, and she would guide me. And so it was like hypnotherapy to a degree, where she'd count me down, letting me relax, just let the mind go, because I was so overly charged mentally that I just needed to just chill. And she would then say, now go to that place. Now I was not looking at the picture, I was looking inside my mind, and she'd guide me through. And for me, it was a tropical beach, scenery, beautiful place. But then I'd be confronted with these violent images, and she would say to me, that's okay, see it, take it, it's there, it's not going to harm you, accept it, and keep going further into now a jungle. And then I'd find, so it was like a little adventure.
Yes.
But it was, to me, a very threatening and dangerous one. But at the end, it was now I've come out of that, take those thoughts, take them somewhere. In my mind, it was like these birds would fly over and they'd drop these thoughts into a volcano to never come back. So as a 10-year-old, that was feasible. I was living in kind of like a Disney version of, having chronic brain problems.
Yes, psychological.
But then later in life, and it lagged with me for a few years. I finally got new thoughts coming through, but through the bulk of high school, probably till I was about 15, 16, they started really tapering off. Things could trigger it and I'd know it would happen. I'd have a bit of an episode and I'd be a bit weird for a while with people, and I'd just go harder at sport. I'd punch myself really in the face at it,
Yes.
And I was good at sport. Thankfully, it was my outlet. It was what I had.
Yeah. And it was gymnastics and cricket, wasn't it?
And rugby.
And rugby, that's
that
right.
Stage,
yes.
Yeah. So I was an action kid. There's no doubt about it. Now I limp around and I'm busted, but
You can always train upper body. And I've got to say, to this day, I'm 50 years old and I'm a former champion bodybuilder, but to this day, training is like therapy for me many days. It is therapy. That's what it is.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And it's funny, like many disciplines, there are many days where you just don't feel like going. You just don't. And it's like doing up your shoes. What I say is just show up.
Yeah.
Just show. If you get there, you start doing a little bit. Before you know it, 45 minutes later, you walk out of there feeling at peace with all these endorphins flowing through. So to me, I get it with exercise. I associated with that in your book.
Yeah.
And I wanted you to tell us about the hypnotherapy there, because you described it so well in Milk Blood. I thought it's fascinating. They're things that I had experience with as well.
Yeah.
So do you still utilize those tools today?
Well, I do. I think they form if I ever need to fall back on. sometimes I might get a bit lazy and life goes off and, different challenges present themselves, especially with relationships and things. And
exactly.
when emotions come into it, it's a
hardest
different thing to deal with.
Yeah, that's
especially
the
love
hardest.
and those.
Yes.
So it's hard to sort of pull yourself back in on that front, but on a personal page, definitely. Yeah. I think they're formed in me now. And plus, once I realised that I didn't have those problems, that they were manufactured.
Yes.
I've got different problems now. But
yes.
Of
course. That never ends. That never ends, right? And I think that's something that you have to come to the realisation of as well, isn't it? It's we will continue to get lessons and we'll continue to get challenges. I look at my life and these challenges, and relationships are always the hardest, but I always look at them like I look at weight training. Weight training is a stress that we put on the muscles, and the adaptation, or what happens then, is our muscles grow and become stronger. So without the stress, muscles atrophy. They don't get stronger. We need some stress in order to become stronger and to grow.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's going to keep happening. So to have these tools is of paramount importance for all of us, right?
God, completely. And that's what I was suggesting before. I think the way the youth today possibly are educated and protected from maybe learning some of these stresses is a bit of a detriment. I'm not an expert by any means, but I see how uncapable parts of society is becoming to handle certain problems.
Yes.
And I think, like you say, we're animals. It's like in the jungle, we're meant to survive, and you've got to be prepared to survive. And I think back to one of your original questions with me with my grandfather, he was saying to me very early on, look, son, the world's going to spit you out if you can't be prepared. You're young, you got to deal with this. And when he was a kid, he was looking out for himself.
Yep.
And then he went to war.
Yes.
And then he walked 50 Ks to and from work. Different story, but inbuilt resilience.
Yes.
And I think it needs to be passed down, because it becomes mentally, it's like you say, physically, you're doing your upper body training and you're doing it regularly and you're conditioned. So mentally, don't like the word spiritually, but it forms part of our neurological connectivity to be able to handle certain problems the more you experience.
Yes. Yes.
Some people flit out and lose it and they can't handle it. They take drugs and end up becoming criminals, or they overdose, or they just lose it and they can't handle.
Yes.
And that's just reality.
Yeah.
People, you can't pick and choose.
They didn't get any tools. They turned, like you say with young people, kids with medicating them these days, if you oppress these feelings and these issues with, if self-medication, whether it's drugs, alcohol, gambling, sex, you're never going to get the chance to build that resilience that your grandfather instilled in you, right?
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, and then you just pointed out a few good examples. I mean, the older you get, then you do experience all those things, like the drugs and the sex and the rock and roll and the travelling and the learning the new things. And that's a whole set of different circumstances where you've got to contain yourself in and around all those possible addictions.
Yes.
That can lead you into whole different pathways in life. And that's where you have those moments where you could go in any direction.
Absolutely.
And that comes back to that straight line of learning, what motivates you to keep it together for yourself, because everyone has a different version of that.
Yes.
And at different times.
Yes.
And that's important. And you're right, it is a conditioning thing. And I believe it's like anything. If it's like when I was younger, I would throw a cricket ball or a golf ball or a tennis ball against a wall day in, day out.
Yes.
And to me, I was unbeatable. I could catch anything. And I can still do it. Something happened the other day and I just surprised myself and went, oh, God, still got it. And not blowing my own trumpet, but it's there.
Yes. Yeah.
So it is that conditioning. And I think humans, we need to, some people are fortunate, they can pick up things very quickly, but if we just pound into ourselves something for a long period of time, then we become it.
Yes, just rock up and do it. Just
right.
Rock up. And that's the discipline, isn't it? It's either sitting around feeling sorry for yourself or sitting around eating potato chips and sitting on the couch, just to make that decision to just rock up, just take some action.
Yeah.
And that's it's that window, isn't it? That's that window where your true fortitude is built, where that true self-esteem comes from, that true self-confidence and that self-discipline that comes from just that opportunity. It's a little window, isn't it? It's that little window. You sit, feel sorry for yourself, lock yourself away and curl up into the fetal position, or you just push yourself to take that bit of action.
I don't think humans are meant to be lazy. We've got to have purpose. and we're meant to do things. And it's, the worst I ever can be is if I just sit around.
Yes.
And if I'm not doing something, or like during COVID, honestly, I could have joined a militia group and fled the country.
Yeah.
Luckily, I've got bad knees and I can't run properly. But,
So you're here, good.
It's like,
I'm glad you didn't.
Got to be doing stuff. Yeah. Being proactive, and I don't want to be cliche with things, but it's easy to. We've got a very comfortable lifestyle these days, and I don't know. I think when it comes to headspace, depression, mental illnesses, we all go through different mental illnesses at different stages in our life, whether it be just a highly stressed environment situation.
You believe that? Everyone goes through them.
Oh, completely.
I agree.
Everyone.
I agree.
Yeah,
I got to say I agree.
Yeah, it's well.
No matter how easy you think it looks like someone's got it,
yeah,
you don't know what's going on inside.
Oh, completely. Yeah. No, I'm a full supporter of that. And I think you'd be, I don't know, sociopathic if you didn't.
Yes, right.
There'd be something that was missing mentally.
Yes. Yeah, it's that widespread and that everyone goes through it.
Well, it's important. I mean, I don't know why I'm talking about analogies earlier. Like if we went down to the beach just down the road and the surf was a bit wild and you hadn't been swimming for a bit, or you're a traveller and you just jumped in the ocean, you got tossed about and crawled back on the sand, you'd realise, well, wow, that was a bit rough. What am I going to do with that? I'm not going back out there like that. No way.
Yep. I'm either not going out till it calms down a bit, or I'll prepare myself.
Yeah, well, you'll know for next time.
Yeah, I can swim, I can surf.
G'day, this is Adrian Simon. We're listening to the Inspired podcast.
Get exclusive access to the Workout Club at gentech.com.au. That's GEN-TEC.com.au. And use code INSPIRED10 to save 10% off your favourite products site-wide.
For the final part of our chat with author Adrian Simon, I ask him, does he believe in a life after death?
Well, my father just passed away about 6 weeks ago. It was a long time coming. He was sick with a terminal lung disease, progressive lung disease, which they don't have long. It's like 2 or 3 years. Yes. But so it was coming. But I think when it happens, obviously you think about what happens, that transition, if there is one, if they slide into something else. My grandmother, I always remember telling my mother that because she had cancer for decades and she had an experience where she passed away, one of those stories that you do hear about where they leave their body and they can experience the people around them and listen to conversations, and they have that light moment. So whether or not that's the mind processing, I mean, I think it's a bit more than that. I've had many different experiences in my life where I communicate to my grandfather and my grandparents, and I have those conversations, whether it to be to myself to find myself answering my own questions, or whether they are there. But there are things that you can't explain and do come across that I think could be from past relatives or people that help us in different ways. But I don't really know. I'd like to think there is. The older I get, the less I'm convinced that there's certainly not this utopian heaven kind of scenario in my view, my version. But the world and the universe is a very complicated and amazing place, and I think the energy that forms within us, whether it be from within a human or from an animal or a plant, that it remains and we recycle. And I think I'd like to think our embodiment of our soul remains, because that impression, there's so much energy of a life that it can't just disappear. Whether it is just given back to the world, I'm not sure. But I'd like to think that, whatever it is, I can still see the people that I talk to if I need to, in a physical presence. And there are unexplainable things. My father, there's just weird things. Weird things happen. So when he passed away, he got cremated on the same day my grandfather, Colin, was born.
Wow.
I was like, well, that's a bit, how's it going? I mean, I know my grandfather hated him.
Yeah.
But then...
But they were connected.
They were
connected in this lifetime.
They were connected. My grandfather didn't mind getting a tip at the races off him, though.
Did he? Yeah, really? Because your dad, he was a bookie. One was a bookie before he got busted, wasn't he?
My grandfather, his father won the Melbourne Cup as a jockey.
Yes, I read that. Was it 3 times? Did I read that correctly?
No, he won once, but he won the Caulfield Cup. It was a different name back then. The Melbourne Cup and the other big Group 1 race in the same carnival on the same horse, which hasn't been repeated.
Getting back to your dad, so your grandfather you didn't have a lot to do with, but your dad, I'm really fascinated about your relationship with your dad. So when he got pardoned and came out of prison, you know, how hard was it reconnecting with him? But then how hard was your relationship with your dad? I mean, you know, I'm so thankful that you gained so many of the tools that you did at a young age, I think, to deal with your relationship from what I'm interpreting in your book, Milk Blood. Can you tell me about that? How tough was it reconnecting with your dad? Tell me about your relationship with him.
Probably the worst father-son relationship you could have. Like, to be honest, it was terrible. Yeah. It was bloody awful.
Yeah.
Like, there was nothing really great about it. I mean, it's easy to say that. Like, you look at the negatives, and I always try to draw on the positives. And there was part of me, because he was absent for the first 16 years of my life, and apart from when I was a child and, you know, I was in his arms until he got arrested at 18 months. I had images of him as a very healthy, successful kind of guy and good-looking magazine qualities and, you know, the world at his feet. So I saw that in my mind, but when
Which was the image? That was the physical image of him before he got busted, wasn't it?
And he was a smooth character. He was very charismatic and gifted with words, and he could write. You know, he had skills. So I always looked at, you know, that nice side of him. But he was arrested for smuggling heroin, right? And he was doing bad shit for a long time.
Yes.
And, you know, obviously spending time in a Thai prison, he became a chronic heroin addict, and he'd take any drug under the sun. You know, he went through awful shit.
Yep.
And self-imposed a lot of it.
Yes.
You know, 12 years in a Thai prison is going to mess you up big time.
Yeah.
Regardless, I mean...
You could never really fully recover from that, right?
It's like a leap of time. You know, he came out, like, I know from my father, he came out and there's mobile phones or that sort of thing. It's like the life is so dramatically changed in X amount of time that it's like a time warp, and they're stuck before they enter the prison.
Plus the torture and experiences they had in prison, like the PTSD. That must have been a thing.
Well, it is. I mean, it is. Look, it's complicated. There's a lot in this question about my relationship with my father. Obviously, he wasn't there, and when I did see him, I was a teenager, and I was 16, and because he was released when I was 14 by the King's pardon, as you mentioned, and he wasn't allowed to see me upon release because the judge had legally kept him away because he came out with HIV, he was Hep C, he was a heroin addict. He could have bitten me in the view of people. Like, he was mentally not right.
Yes.
Like, can you imagine? Like, he's not right coming out of... If you've read his stories and what's in there, guy's damaged, right?
Yeah, it makes sense, but you don't think about it.
You don't think. And,
sense.
you know, he just wasn't right in that space. So when I did see him in all these places, like, I couldn't believe it. And years later, I was telling a fellow writer about... I went to meet my father in Oxford Street, Sydney, in a place called the Courthouse Hotel. Is that right?
Yeah. I think so. That was in the book. Yeah.
And the bar inside is called the Judgment Bar, right?
Yes.
I didn't piece it together at the time, but I remember now. I look back and go, "You got to be kidding, right?" So there's my old man for the first time that I've seen him since when I was a child in the Thai prison. He's sitting there like watching races, and there he was, and I was like, "Fuck, there's my father." And he was like, "Fuck, there's my son."
Yeah.
It was, you know, different, to say the least. And there's chemistry of biological acceptance between father and son.
Yes.
And my first thing was, well, I'm taller than you, man. And I was really happy about that. And he came back with something just as witty, you know, and it was like, there's my old man. You know, there's this, we had something that was very similar, which was, we have a good sense of humour and we can see the lighter side of things, but underneath it, he was damaged. You know, he was tapping his toe relentlessly under the table, and, you know, he he was a mess, and he was very anxious to see me. But you know, that was when I was 16. I'm now 44, and he passed away last January, and a lot of shit went down in between that time. And you know, he continued taking drugs, and he just didn't bounce back out of the prison. You know, like you talk about PTSD, and you know, he went through a world of shit, but so did a lot of other people. You know, my grandparents went to war. You know, imagine seeing people blow up all the time. You know, like, so I never copped it as a son.
Sure.
You know, I forgave him for making a terrible mistake when I was a child, not having a father. Yes. So be it. That's cool. I can live with that. Yeah. You know, but he never came back and never tried to straighten his affairs out or be a better man or try to be a father.
Did he ever go and, like, on his own accord, go and get counselling and try and deal with these demons?
No, he went and got cocaine and bloody drugs and hung out with the wrong people and gambled.
So you must have been looking at him thinking, at 9 years old, I manned up. I stood on my own 2 feet as hard as it was. I was broken inside at my age, and I did it. I did it, and you can't even do it, and you're a grown man.
Well, it took me a long time, and look, I don't want to try to judge other people's experiences.
Sure.
You know, especially my father's too. Like, I can write about it and talk about it, but, you know, I wasn't there. I didn't see it through his eyes or his capable, like those mechanisms you talk about. Like, he wasn't resilient. Like, he wasn't as strong as some others. Yes. I'm not saying myself, but, you know, he didn't deal with things in a way that I would have liked him to deal with it, but, you know, that was his life.
Yes.
You know, I was very determined, and I think the strength, not just from my grandfather and my mother, was from my own, this is not happening to me, and I'll prove the world differently from word go. You know, and I had to do this.
Yes.
And that's gone now. He's died. So I feel different. I don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore about any of it. It just slid into me where I just no longer needed to impress myself, let alone anyone else. It was like, I don't need to fight that battle anymore because I don't need to prove to my father or to myself to be a better person or try to be successful. Like, famous jockey grandfather. My father was infamous. He's bloody hugely famous from his book, which I hated because that was wrong to me. None of us got any recognition, but we didn't want it. You know, there's a whole lot of complexity there, which messes with your head if you let it. But you just keep going through.
Yeah.
Do your laces up. You know, fix your bed.
That's it.
You know, catch up and realise that you've got good people in your life, and that's fine. But to ultimately answer your question, I mean, it was a waste. I think, you know, what could have been, my father and I could have had a father-son relationship.
Yes.
But it was never going to be. And this is the path that I live. And I'm grateful I've got an incredible mother who is like my best friend, but also someone who fought hard to make me who I am in a way, especially when I was younger. So I'm thankful for that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. There's good and bad in all things.
Yeah, exactly. And if you can get to that point where you are, you look at the things that you can be grateful for. So I see with your dad, I'm thinking you excelled at sport. You threw yourself into sport as much to get through your hardships. But I reckon you threw yourself at sport to be good at sport as well, to say, look at me, Dad, look at me. My dad's not looking at me. He's not proud of me. He can't see me. So when you're saying this just 6 weeks ago, this presence of mind to say, I don't need to prove anything to anyone. I don't have to show anyone anymore. Look at me, I'm good. I'm a good kid.
That's right.
I'm a good boy.
Yeah.
You don't need anyone's approval. But it's a very, very strange thing, isn't it? Because ultimately, we're always often trying to prove ourselves to someone, possibly to a father figure. It might be a father figure within our own self that we're pushing and pushing and pushing. And it's like, no, you are enough. You're enough. I'm enough. We've always been enough.
Completely.
But how can we get to that realization? And you've had to go through all of this.
Yeah.
Your father's passing, and you're at that realization, which it's a huge blessing, Adrian.
It is. There was a lot of shit. I mean, I had to take on a lot, but I don't like to look at myself in that way. Like, what I go through is just what I go through.
Sure.
You know, no special case there, and I hate being treated as such.
Yes.
Because it isn't that way. It's like, who cares?
Everyone goes through something. You said it to us before. We all go through something. All of us. We've all got a story.
And we're talking earlier about how the best way to help someone is just by being genuine and honest and in the right way at the right time. Just explain how you feel.
Right on.
Without like going or like having a purpose for it. It's easy to go, oh, look at me, this has happened because now I want you to tell me, I'm a victim and support me and pressurize, it's like crap,
Yeah.
But if you're genuine and you just feel it, we can help people through our own experience. That's what makes us relatable and human to each other, because we need to share that.
Yeah.
In the right way. Like men have a different way of doing it. Like I'd say, like my grandfather would be amazed that I'd be sitting here right now talking about this sort of stuff. He'd be like, don't air your dirty laundry to the world. Like,
keep a stiff upper lip.
Don't. What you're doing is, you're embarrassing me. But I'm taller than him as well. So it's all right.
Adrian, it's been such a pleasure and a privilege having you on. And there's so much I know that you've said that it doesn't only resonate with me, but it'll resonate with our listeners. I guarantee it 100%. Before you go, it's a question we ask everyone here. Now, thinking about the place you're at now, where you're living now, the headspace you're in now, the presence, the gratitude you've got now, what or who inspires you?
That's a really hard question to answer because, in the past I looked at different role models or people that did inspire me on a different sphere, whether it be a sportsman. I always adored Steve Waugh, for example. Looking up to a man like him, or different phases, might have been an actor or someone who had a really nice presence about themselves. And so I always sort of styled myself on different people that I thought was how I would like to see myself within my own character.
Yes.
But now, like as I just mentioned, that I feel like I'm a blank canvas in a way. And it's, again, I hate the cliches, but I can now look for new inspiration.
Beautiful.
And I think what really I feel the most is I'm just really, like, this sounds like ridiculous in a way, but I love other people's stories as well. And now identified, I've been caught up in my own head with just getting through. And there's a lot we haven't talked about with the mental health side of things with my old man and drug addictions with him and shit. But you get caught up in so much. And recently I've just met people that just have equally cool stories to tell in such a different area in life. So I'm finding just everyday people inspiring. And I think it's interesting, and I said before, and I won't go on too much, but the guy who cremated my father, I picked up my old man's ashes, which was just crazy, bizarre. It happens to us all, but it was because he was like this invisible presence in my life and wasn't physical for a long time. And then I picked up his ashes and they're really heavy. I thought, you fat bastard. Anyway.
He's still causing me stress.
Yeah, I mean, God, man.
He's still hard
lost
work.
a bit of weight, man. But anyway, so I had to pay the cremation, but through my father's accounts and all this stuff he did with wills and things. Anyway, so I had to take the check in a week later to the guy who facilitated the service. I walked in there and he's like, and he was this big sort of army looking dude. He was like probably in his 60s, very fit, kind of strong, very together. And he's like, what do you do? And I said, I've written a few stories, blah, blah, blah. And I said, shit. He goes, are you good? What about? And I said, about my life and family and a novel and stuff. He goes, what's your family story? And I said, about my father. He wrote The Damage Done. He spent 12 years in Thai prison. He goes, get out of here. I said, what? He goes, I used to be one of Australia's top federal police officers and customs agents. I thought a bit sick in my head, but I thought they got him again in the end. Yeah. They cremated him.
Yeah.
Which was weird.
Yes.
And I'm not trying to make a joke out of something that's of death or whatever, but he then went on to just talk about his crazy life working as a Fed, raiding drug dealers, taking down pedophiles, just a life full on of extreme sort of action, which depicted like a Hollywood movie.
Yes.
And so I thought that's when this is why I'm answering your question this way. It was like I looked at him and went, fuck, I'm ordinary.
Brilliant.
Excuse my French, but
brilliant.
Yeah, and then I thought, well, God, there's just so much out there with people.
Yep. So much content for you to put into your new TV series upcoming on Netflix.
Well, hopefully, or Amazon.
Yeah.
If you're listening, Amazon.
Adrian Simon has written 2 books, Milk Blood and Unbreaking the Girl, which is loosely based around his mother's life. Both these books, as well as The Damage Done by Adrian's late father Warren Fellows, are available at most bookstores. All three books are definitely worth your time. I'd like to thank Adrian for joining me at the Inspired podcast. He was honest, raw, and vulnerable. If you are enjoying Inspired, let your friends know about us. Don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. In our next episode, I talk to the legendary singer Vince Contarino, whose voice and story will truly inspire you. I'm Nick Jones, and this is Inspired.
Thanks for listening to the Inspired podcast. Burn fat and get in shape using Gentech Nutrition's premium quality fat burners. Use code INSPIRED10 and save 10% off your favourite products at gentech.com.au. That's GEN-TEC.com.au.
This podcast has been produced by eatals.com.au. That's www.etales.com.au.